Hello everyone, this is Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary devices and more to help you become a literary expert. So if this sounds exactly like what you need, make sure that you hit the subscribe button right below the video. So in today's video, I'll be going through 3 key pieces of context to help deepen your understanding of the play Othello, which I know a lot of you are studying. I have an entire playlist of detailed analysis on Othello, which you can check out here. Now, as with a lot of Shakespeare's plays, it's really important for us to differentiate between the contemporary context, i.e. Shakespeare's own Renaissance England, and the fictional context within the play. In Othello's case, that would be the Ottoman-Venetian Wars and Renaissance Venice. Or in Macbeth's case, it would be closer to home, England, but further back in time, which is medieval Scotland. Now, a good starting question to consider is how Shakespeare and his contemporary audience perceived the time and place where the play is set. So in the case of Othello, we should be asking how an Elizabethan audience understood the politics and culture of Renaissance Venice, and how they would have perceived social outsiders like Moorish mercenaries, which of course Othello is an example of. So with these questions in mind, let's dive straight into our first context point. In Shakespeare's time, Venice symbolized the height of European civilization, political savvy, and cultural sophistication. Now, from afar, the English would have read translated travelogues like Thomas Coryat's Crudities and political tracts like Gasparo Contarini's The Commonwealth and Government of Venice. As a result, they developed an impression of Venice as a refined, advanced, and cosmopolitan hub, one that was worthy for the English to emulate. Interestingly, the historical conditions of Elizabethan England weren't all that unlike Venice at the time, as Elizabeth I's 40-year reign marked a period of relative peace which created fertile conditions for art and culture like Shakespeare and Marlowe's plays to flourish. Of course, the way Othello plays out suggests that beneath the veneer of sophistication and civility, Venice has its own share of rottenness and immorality festering within, which is represented no less than by the antagonist of the play, Iago. Venetian though he may be, Iago is more crude than sophisticated and more bestial than civil, as reflected perhaps in his dramatically ironic comment to Othello in Act 4, Scene 1, "There's many a beast then in a populous city, and many a civil monster," like him. But it's worth noting that for most of the play, the action takes place not in Venice itself, but in Cyprus, which is the tributary state which the Venetians had won over from the Turks. The shift in setting then marks a geographical transition from a carefully manicured hub of civility to a chaos-ridden nexus of aggression. So the more interesting point to consider about Shakespeare's use of setting is how Venice, in seeking to preserve a pristine image of this fortress of civilization, has effectively outsourced its military base and talent to a foreign land, i.e. Cyprus, and to a foreigner, which is, of course, Othello. Now, Andrew Sisson, an Othello scholar, has pointed out that Gasparo Contarini in his treatise deems perturbation, which is socio-political instability, to be the most negative element in Venetian state governance. So this outsourcing approach of military activity would seem logical from the vantage of Venice's rulers. And applying this to the play, we could draw a parallel between the political and the domestic shifts in seeking to segment off the more primitive, darker energies in its state, as manifested in the aggression, malevolence, and nastiness of, say, Brabantio and Iago. Venice is suppressing what its society needs, actually, as a natural outlet for expression. Now, we can extend this one step further and draw another parallel between the Venetian state and Othello the man and his marital household. The more Venice tries to transfer the uglier, baser functions elsewhere, the more its people's dark, violent essence must come out in their dealings with others, as we see in the way Iago treats those around him. Likewise, the more Othello tries to maintain a faultless persona as this noble warrior who was only invited and accosted by Venetians for both work and love, with no agenda of his own, the more he crumbles eventually under the pressure of holding himself up to unrealistic, almost saintly standards of behavior. Just as a state must allow for its civilized and chaotic facets to play out within the same environment, an individual must accept that they possess both light and dark, good and bad impulses all at once, and that there is neither need nor sense in trying to repudiate one or the other, which, if done, will probably lead to disastrous extremities as seen in the fate of Othello and Iago. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. Now, during Elizabeth I's reign, England actively pursued international trade by expanding her reach into African and Middle Eastern markets. As a result, there was a greater degree of goods and labour exchange across borders. This facilitated more interracial encounters. For instance, African and Arabic merchants, dignitaries and diplomats were regularly invited to the English royal court during Elizabeth's rule. Shakespeare, while not personally acquainted with Elizabeth as far as we know, would certainly, though, have witnessed the growing multicultural presence at court, where his acting company would often visit to put on performances. Travelogues such as Leo Africanus's Description of Africa, published in 1550, were also widely read by the English public, which contributed to the persona of the Moorish other in the English cultural imagination. A landmark event was the establishment of the Barbary Company in 1585, which granted England exclusive trading rights with North African nations in the Barbary coast. More relevantly to the play Othello, this opportunity provided England with access to Moorish mercenaries, who were men hired as soldiers on a contractual basis. This made these foreign men guardians of the English state and overseers of English national security. But that they were clearly foreigners also made them a constant source of fear and suspicion for the native English people. So this arrangement created the paradoxical anxiety of having to entrust the state's interest in the hands of foreigners who have no existential stake in the country's fate, which raised the question, how can you ever trust someone that you don't fully understand? In the play, Brabantio the Venetian demonstrates the ultimate ability to isolate professional respect from personal goodwill towards a foreigner like Othello, as his friendliness towards Othello, the military man, switches very quickly to animosity when he realizes that Othello has also become his son-in-law. In a subtler way, despite Desdemona's genuine love for Othello, her tragic plight could also be seen as the result of her inability to truly understand her foreigner husband, his passions, motivations, and, perhaps most importantly, his insecurities. So the tragedy when it comes to Othello, then, is that while he may be a functional and even respected member of the Venetian state because he has military expertise and valor, he can never be a fully integrated and accepted Venetian citizen because his values and modes of behavior are fundamentally different, or at least deemed to be such. So Shakespeare may be portraying what seems like the tale of a disastrous interracial marriage, but then at the same time reflecting on the socio-political implications of engaging Moorish or foreign mercenaries for the domestic interest of the English state. As technically useful as foreigners may be for fighting off military threats, will the English people ever be able to overcome their doubt and aversion towards whom they politically depend on, but will always culturally look askance? And if not, might perhaps these mercenaries be a ticking time bomb for deeper, equally problematic social problems? Now, if you've seen my 10+1 key facts about Shakespeare video, you'll know that the bard often adapted his plot from existing source texts, some of which were written in Latin, Greek, and Italian. For Othello, Shakespeare most likely referenced a short story anthology called Gli Hecatomithi by Cinthio, who was an Italian Renaissance dramatist and poet. Specifically, Shakespeare would have used one of the stories titled Un Capitano Moral, which is crucially different from Shakespeare's adaptation when it comes to Iago's motivation. In Cinthio's Italian text, the ensign is driven by his unrequited lust for Desdemona to plot against the Moor, But in Shakespeare's play, various possible reasons for Iago's hatred towards Othello are proposed. But till the very end of the play, it's never really made clear why exactly Iago wants Othello to suffer so much. By making Iago's motives ambiguous, Shakespeare makes his version of characterization more human and more dramatically impactful because audiences may be left trying to figure out what A.C. Bradley, who's the famous Shakespearean scholar, calls Iago's motiveless malignity. So through this approach, Shakespeare presents a messier but more realistic take on social and interpersonal relations, which is contrary to the sort of more clean-cut, causality-driven worldview that was often reflected in classical Renaissance texts. After all, rule-based notions like logic, grammar, and rhetoric form the core of humanist education. But Shakespeare, perhaps having experienced this set of education, but also afterwards navigated the chaotic, unpredictable rough and tumble of mid-16th century English society, would have wanted to challenge this idea that things should ever happen for a specific reason or unfold according to some cosmic forces that we can make sense of. Most of the time, we just don't know why some people dislike us when we've done nothing to abrogate them, or why bad things happen to good people and vice versa. So the desire to know or get to the bottom of everything is ultimately a cause for suffering, as we clearly see from Othello's case. So perhaps then it's wiser for us to relinquish this impulse, as uncomfortable as it may be. As such, Othello could be seen as a deeper, humanistic and philosophical triumph born out of the intellectual cross-pollination between an Italian and English dramatist, because Shakespeare's adaptation of Cinthio's text raises the philosophical bar and deepens the psychological exploration of human nature, conflict, and relationships. And there you have it, guys. 3 of the most important pieces of context that I think you should know about Othello the play. Remember that the goal when it comes to thinking about context is to consider how historical setting, cultural ideas, and source text that Shakespeare referenced matters to your understanding of the play's themes and characters. Context must always inform the text, so make sure that you are aware of how the 2 aspects synergize and work with each other, and make sure that you show this awareness accordingly in your essay. So for your next video, I would recommend that you check out my video about racism in Othello, which is a theme that can only be understood well in light of a strong contextual understanding, which you, of course, now have after watching this video. If you want personalized feedback on any Othello or English Lit essays, make exclusive video requests and access members-only content, check out my membership program by clicking the join button below. Please hit the thumbs up button below if you found this video useful, so I'll be encouraged to keep making these weekly study videos for you and other passionate lit learners all around the world. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on my top grade English Lit content, and I will see you in the next one.